the first reaction people had was always curiosity. And that was a major win for my project. People were curious and invited to figure out, what is this thing? And that really, it seems like a minor element, but in the long term, on a community scale, having a space be inviting, like welcoming, kind of asking people to come closer and gather, it had really big effects for turning this space. A lot of these spaces that I'm talking about are dark and have a bad reputation and are cold and have not much interest, not much things to do. So having this little gathering space that's inviting people to come and touch and play with the blocks really transformed how people saw spaces.
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tenser, CEO of SpyderWorks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Alex Whiteley, a design student and creator of Ember, a pop-up system for enhancing community space perception. Like this video if you enjoy our show, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Alex Whiteley, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So Alex, you are just finishing up as a student, I believe.
Yeah, I've just graduated. It's been maybe 3 weeks now.
3 weeks. And tell us what you studied and what have you learned in 3 weeks?
I've studied industrial design at Carleton University. If people aren't familiar with that, it's really like architecture, but everything except the building. So everything, every product, that's what I specialize in. And it's been a pleasure. Super great program.
So when you say everything but the building, you're talking about products. It's what, how people, it's the products people use, but I guess you think a lot about how they imagine them as well and how they relate to them. It's not just a physical part.
Yeah, absolutely. The key element of the design program is going through the design process, which is it's really about empathy. It's you're always designing for someone other than yourself. So it's about trying to understand, what do other people need?
Very cool. So your thinking or your understanding your program actually got you onto CBC News, which is Canada's national news network. Is that right?
Yeah. I had a talk with a reporter about my bachelor thesis project. And yeah, it was a pleasure to share that with more people, because this is a project I've been working on for about 8 months. So I'm quite proud of it.
Cool. So tell us about it. Tell us about what gets you on the news before you've even graduated.
Yeah, my project was called Ember, and it was an exploration of public space and social connection. So the end result was a system of sort of modular interactive furniture that was really designed for low resource communities.
First of all, what makes you start thinking about community and community spaces? Like, of all the things that you can think about in the world, how did that sort of come up in your mind?
At the beginning of my thesis project, my big general theme was social connection, which is a very general theme. It's a very mysterious thing, social connection. And I've always had quite an interest in sort of community in the public space. So I want to see and explore how these two things are connected, because intuitively there is a connection there, but it's hard to put into words. But what I found was that public spaces really contribute to prosperous communities. There were dozens of studies that were finding correlations between well-used public spaces. This is like parks and plazas and courtyards. And these are correlated with low crime rates and community happiness and community resilience and all sorts of benefits. Yeah, so I really wanted to help support that community space where I could.
So we have community space, we have social connection. You did it at a really interesting time because you would have been thinking and developing this pretty much during the prime of the pandemic. So first of all, tell us a little more about social connection, and then tell us about connection when you're not allowed to connect. Like how did you even conceive of this in that
Hmm.
time frame?
Yeah, that was definitely a big wrench in the whole operation but it really emphasized how necessary this was, because throughout the pandemic a lot of people have obviously lost their social network, the people that they see on their day to day, and people are much more hesitant to interact with each other, especially strangers. So when I started my field work, I was surveying and interviewing urban residents. And what I found was just an overwhelming interest in getting back connected with their neighbors. People were really wanting to connect with the people around them and sort of know people a little bit better and spend more time around people. But yeah, that hesitancy was there. So my project was really aiming to see how I can make that a comfortable experience for people.
Well, I think it's pretty interesting in a lot of ways, but one, studying potential for products or services in a worst case situation. I mean, I guess it gives you a really strong perspective of what those barriers are you have to break down.
Yeah, they definitely become very obvious in these extreme scenarios. But I was hoping that I was trying to see into the future, which is the thing that designers really try to do quite often, to design for what is this situation going to be like next year or in 5 years or in 10 years, because we don't want to make projects that are obsolete in 6 months. And the thing with the public space, it's always changing.
So how is it changing? Like are we using it differently? Is the shape or size like what when you say that what is changing about public space?
One thing I found, which maybe it seems intuitive, but I live in Canada and I was really focusing on Canada as my main target audience. And what I found was that people really drastically change how they see their community spaces depending on the seasons. Our seasons are pretty extreme. And what I found was that in the summer, people are really interested in passively using their space, which was like reading or just sitting or just like really hanging out. So really passive use. But in the winter, that changed completely. People wanted a goal in a space. They were looking for something goal oriented, like they were going to destinations, they were doing activities, they're going on a hike or they're going skating. So public spaces that weren't suited for both, that were just suited for one or the other, ended up going completely unused in the off season.
So are you looking then to create so you're looking for different uses of the spaces depending on the season and time, etc.
Yeah, one of the key words throughout my whole design process was adaptability. It was to make something that isn't too specific, that can kind of be flexible in the way it's used, so that it remains useful all year. Because a space that is consistently useful is continuing to give the community those benefits, those social connections, those community ties that strengthen the community.
So when you take all that and you take community space, you take connection, you take the need to be viable year round, and I actually I did my undergrad in Ottawa, and when it's -20, you're absolutely right. People want a pretty specific use or reason to be outside. We're not lounging in the snowbanks. But you take all of those different things, and how do you start to think about it? Like, what is the genesis then of Ember and your project? Like, how do you translate a whole bunch of ideas into something more concrete?
It was really challenging, really, because this was a very it's a very vague question. How do we enhance this public space? And on top of that, I'm not talking about a specific public space. I'm talking about public spaces all over Canada. But how I started was conceptualizing scenarios that just kind of started to work. They were really rough. I had one that involved these long wires, overhead wires that light up, and one that had a big inflatable campfire. And really these rough scenarios that I made little scale models with little scale figurines, like action figures. And I had users sort of play make believe. I role played the scenario. I showed pictures. I said, imagine it's January and you're in your community. And I got feedback. And using multiple scenarios, I was able to approach a final product that I was confident that would work.
So describe the final product a little more, because you talk about a pop-up system. I mean, it's not pop-up benches and things. Is it like when I saw the drawings and things? Yeah, describe to us. Give us a bit of a visual picture of what that system is.
So they look like geometric blocks of glowing, fiery, orange and red shapes. It's hard to visualize it without pictures. It can be used as a seat. It's sort of bench-like, but they are interactive. They react to touch. They react to presence with this sort of shimmering fire light. And in my design process, I had a bunch of looks. I had a bunch of forms that I was exploring. And I found that since this is going to tons of communities, and I don't know which ones, I wanted a form factor that was not too obtrusive, that wasn't too in your face, because I don't know if this would fit with everybody. So the end result is sort of like a Lego block that can be installed based on the community's needs. Whoever's in charge, the community leader that's installing it, would find an arrangement that suits their space. And using these Lego blocks, they can make these clusters and shapes that are really well suited to the space.
So these are clusters of very large blocks that as you approach them, as you touch them, as they hear you, they give off this sort of amber fire-like glow internally.
Exactly.
So when you showed that to people and described it, what kind of reactions did you get that made you say, yeah, this is a right idea that I should be going after?
The first reaction people had was always curiosity. And that was a major win for my project. People were sort of curious and invited to figure out, what is this thing? And that really, it seems like a minor element, but in the long term, at a community scale, having a space be inviting, like welcoming, kind of asking people to come closer and gather, it had really big effects for turning this space. A lot of these spaces that I'm talking about are dark and have a bad reputation and are cold and have not much interest, not much things to do. So having this little gathering space that's inviting people to come and touch and play with the blocks really transformed how people saw spaces.
Very cool. And I love that word. I mean, I think you're right when you say curiosity. If you can kindle curiosity, that's a huge win for any product, because we're fighting so many images and so many sensory experiences today that if we can make people stop for a second, whether it's outdoors or in a grocery store or wherever it might be, I think that is a huge win in the first one. So kudos for that.
Yeah, I was really excited when I was showing it to users and they were having these sort of sweet moments with it, these exciting interactions. I mean, that was exciting for me, seeing that I was able to achieve something that had a lot of potential.
And so how did you show it to users? Were you able to make a full-size type mock-up for this, or?
Yeah, I worked larger and larger and more high fidelity models. My first or one of my early models was honestly, it was a garbage can and I had rigged some lights on the inside, but the garbage can, it looked right. It was the nice cloudy plastic that you may not have realized it was a garbage can. And using some microcontrollers, I learned a little bit about coding for this project and lights. I was able to get pretty close to the idea where people could knock on the garbage can and it would shimmer and react to their touch. But by the end, I was able to make a 1-to-1 scale model that looks very, very close to the real thing, as well as a 10:1 scale model. So quite a small one where people could really see how an entire park space would look.
That's very cool. But so, Alex, tell me this. So you've just graduated. You obviously have a knack for this. As I said, you made it on national television before you graduated. How do you discover this passion about yourself that somehow you're the right person, or that you have the interest to mock up a garbage can and ultimately create a product from it? I mean, is this something that you were always interested in creation? How do you get engaged and get onto that path as you know, not a curiosity, but your life?
I think where it really started for me, before I even started studying design, I was studying visual arts in high school, and I was very passionate about arts. And what really spoke to me was installation art, these sort of big sculptures, spaces that you could experience. This always resonated with me. And then I put that on the back burner as I really focused on design, but it never really went away. I realized that in design, you can also achieve a lot by working with spaces, transforming spaces. And then in my first internship, I was lucky enough to work at an agency in Paris that does events. And for them, I was designing, quite similar to this thesis project. I was designing temporary installation spaces to fit events. And I think that's when I knew I like the big things. I like things that you can experience and be inside. That's really where my passion lies.
So how did you end up in Paris? How did that whole connection come to be?
A lot of perseverance, mostly. This is right at the beginning of COVID as well. This was 2020. So it was definitely a very bumpy ride, but it was a lot of applications, working really hard on my portfolio, and this firm took a chance on me. It was a great time. I learned a huge amount.
What's the experience like working abroad? What is it? I mean, there's obviously the languages and the sights and the sounds, but I also imagine for you that how people relate to space might be different depending on culture, how they relate to one another, how they see the outside.
One thing I really love about traveling and seeing new places is seeing how people use their cities. Definitely where I'm from, Ottawa, is very different from Paris, and how people interact with the cities is very different. And in Paris, I found, since it's such a high density city, those community spaces were really thriving. There's a lot of people sharing the space. A lot of people don't have a backyard because it's so urban. And these public parks and courtyards were really places where people are comfortable to come together and gather and share time.
What I love too is as you say, that sharing time, it seems like it's pretty accessible. I mean, you don't have to be Ottawa or Paris. You can be a smaller town or community and find a way to apply what you've done at Ember, or just physical or spatial design to create something a little bit welcoming, even in a small community on a limited budget, if you will.
Yeah, the fundamentals of my project can be applied to a lot of spaces in really simple ways. The fundamental aspects are really that if you find a way to integrate a little bit of play into a space, it has massive positive effects for how people see the space. It's inviting, it feels quite safe. There's research actually that showed that including spaces of play made people feel 90% safer. I don't know how the numbers work out, but it was 90% safer just by including a little bit of play, because it shows that everybody has a bit of ownership over their public spaces and that they belong.
And so when you test, what you do for public spaces, and you talk about curiosity and play, are you looking at how people of different ages react, like from small children to older adults to family groups? Like how do you see that it resonates with a full community? Because you're not just designing for one person or one age group or social group.
In many kinds of designing for children is very difficult, but in this specific case, designing for children is the easiest because they're the most open to play. They will play on anything naturally, but the hard part is trying to get adults to play as well. So for my project, it meant I needed to really make it accessible. So early iterations of my project had moving parts, had things you pump up with your feet to make lights glow brighter. And it was definitely fun and playful. But what I found for my users is that for the most part, adults are just going to walk by. They have places to go, places to be, they're doing things, and they're not going to stop and play with these installations in their spaces. So I had to kind of dial back the interaction to something that could touch everybody. So that's why I split it into two levels. There's a proximity interaction that uses infrared sensors that just glows based on your presence. So that allows me to extend a little playful moment to everybody. Just as I'm walking through my park because I need to go buy a bag of coffee, the park will glow for me and I'll have a nice moment. And if the curiosity is strong enough, you can go touch the Ember blocks, and on contact, they have an animated shimmer that sort of, I really wanted that body interaction, that using your body to affect and change your space was really a satisfying and fun moment.
Very cool. So how did this end up on CBC? How did it end up on the news?
I'm not too sure. I think at our grad show, or Carleton University, we have a graduate show every year where all these final projects go on display, and we're all at our booths talking about what we've done. And I think my professor, who was supervising my project, passed the word along to the Carleton Media Relations Officer, who passed it along to CBC. And they're interested enough to speak to me over the phone, did an interview, and ended up becoming a little article with a brief overview of my project.
Very nice. There's nothing like great profs to impact your life positively.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. I mean, decades later, there's still profs from Carleton, from the Sprott School that I'm close to. So we're always thankful for that. So Alex, as our time comes to a close on Say Hi to the Future today, what's next for you now that you're out in the real world? What are you going to be doing?
I'm at probably the most exciting time in my career because I can sort of do anything, and I'm not quite sure yet. But I really hope to continue in this vein of working on products that are sort of at the intersection of products and spaces. And that might mean working on temporary event spaces. There are many agencies that do this, that specialize in event spaces. And that really speaks to me. I still have a lot to learn. So I think the working world is going to be a whole new school for me. But hopefully I'll kick off my career very soon.
That sounds great, Alex. Yeah, the working world is a school for all of us every day. Don't worry. You will always have a lot to learn. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Take care.